Welcome back to another Showdown in the Badlands card review. This time around, we got some neutral cards to take a look at, including a new neutral legendary here, Flint Firearm. I love that name. His arm is literally fire. I am a sucker for stupid puns like that. Flint here is a new 3-mana 3/3 battle cry. You get a random quick draw card. If you play it this turn, repeat this. So here we've got ourselves a little bit of a value generator. You get late in the game, you plop this down, you get a bunch of stuff added to your hand, basically creates a turn all by itself out of thin air. Now, there is something I want to acknowledge here for quick draw. It's a new keyword we saw introduced last time. Quick draw cards have a bonus if it entered your hand this turn. Despite the name implying it needs to be drawn, it doesn't. It just has to enter your hand. So they are going to have their bonus active here from Flint Firearm, which generally means, you know, they're going to be the stronger version of the card, at least based on the ones we've seen thus far. If you need a quick refresher on the quick draw cards that have gotten revealed so far, this one we're going to talk about later. Trolley Problem and Dehydrate here. So these are like removal spell with life gain, rush minions, and taunt minions. So far a little bit more defensively aligned for sure. So if you're behind in the game a little bit, maybe slamming a Flint Firearm could, of course, help you stabilize. There's going to be more quick draw cards, of course. We'll see that we'll kind of shift that. We don't know the average cost. If they're all like 4 and 5 mana, it could get really clunky to execute a Flint Firearm turn because you may just kind of like have these weird leftover floated manas where it's like, oh, I got a 4 mana card with 3 mana left. Ah, crap, that sucks. I'm missing a lot of the potential value here because unlike something like Instructor Fireheart, which had very similar vibes to this card, you don't get to discover. They're just random cards in this case. The Fireheart Discover really helps you find things that fit both the situation and the mana cost that you needed in order to keep a turn chaining forward. With Flint Firearm, that's going to be a little bit tougher. It's just going to be a mix of minions and spells as well. So I definitely think this card looks a lot weaker than something like Instructor Fireheart. Number one, that was spells and class cards, and it probably a more consistently predictable outcome, whereas this is going to have just a bunch of randomness, and it's going to be hard to get the things you need sometimes, especially as we see more and more of these quick draw cards. They probably won't all be aligned along a single axis, which is sort of defensive. There will be a mix and match that makes it hard to get good consistent results out of this card. Now that said, that doesn't mean the card is unplayable or not useful. There could still be plenty of decks that just need that value bomb, and they have plenty of other survivability. They got time. They're just looking for stuff to do, especially as we see the return of Highlander Reno decks. No duplicate decks need cards. They need cards that can do good things all on their own. Flint Firearm could definitely slot into a Highlander deck and just be one of those value pieces as you're filling out that 30 card or sometimes even 40 card list. Cards like this start to look appealing in those instances. Like, yeah, okay, this is a whole turn on its own. Sure, I'll take that. So could this give Flint Firearm a little boost here? The bounty board, a 3-mana 0/5, your Excavate, Quick Draw, Tradable, and Legendary cards all cost 1 less. Now, I don't think that is something that would stack. For instance, if you had a Legendary Excavate card, I don't think that's going to cost 2 less. It's probably a one-time application here. Just if it hits any of these checks, it gets discounted by 1. That would make this card a lot more interesting, but I don't think it'll work that way. Maybe I'm wrong, who knows. So this is something where you play this and then you play a Flint Firearm. You've got yourself an easier time perhaps cycling through various quick draw cards. Some of the quick draw cards in particular, we've seen one already that has a discount that makes it cost 1, so then it costs 0. If you got a lot of those, you could cycle almost indefinitely. But of course, you have to pay this kind of 3 mana overhead in order to do that. Or if you try to play 2 of these with Flint, you'd have to pay a 6 mana overhead. So outside of some other cost reductions, reducing either Flint or the bounty board themselves, that's going to be hard to do anything crazy with. Now, that said, you could do stuff like Shadow Step, some bounty boards, or bake in some cost discounts on this, and then play them with a Shadow Stepped Flint, and maybe discount a bunch of stuff all at once and have some kind of crazy pop-off miracle turn. I think that's going to feel too clunky, and I still think the reward consistency on quick draws, for instance, aren't going to make that feel particularly worth it. That feels like you do a lot of things and play a lot of cards, but maybe not end up in like a crazy broken game state afterwards. You do all that work and probably wouldn't actually even win the game in many cases. You just probably have a board and some bonus cards and an empty opponent's board, but you know, you'd have to put in 5 to 6 cards or something in your deck to just kind of clear the board, maybe play for a board swing, which again is probably too much work. So I mean, maybe if we see enough damage in the quick draw pool, we can start talking. So reserve a little bit of judgment for later once we see more quick draw cards, but I really doubt that can come together very easily, which I think ultimately does leave this card in a pretty clunky spot. None of these seem like there's any kind of crazy chains or infinite loops or that sort of thing with only a 1 cost discount. And then of course just playing this out on curve and hoping for the best, you know, oh, I want to play my 5 mana legendary on turn 4, like that just feels way too honest, the cost discount here not being significant enough in that case. So, and you know, just a 0/5 feeling really bad as a result. So all in all, to me, I think this card is really fun. It's a cool idea to kind of give bonuses to a lot of the new keywords in particular, but ultimately, I just don't see this coming together in a compelling way. The cost discount's not significant enough in an era of cost discounts in Hearthstone where so many things get so freaking cheap. This really doesn't feel like it's adding much. So this card's kind of insane. This is the Howdy Fin, a 2-mana 2/3 Murloc. And this card text is a little bit hard to parse, but I'm going to explain how I think it works. You guys let me know what you think. Whenever your hand has less than 3 cards in it, get a random Murloc. Now, notably, that's not a battle cry. That is an on-board permanent text. It's like an aura effect in essence, which to me reads, if I play this on an empty hand, I think it's gonna add 3 cards to my hand because that text is gonna keep checking on board. It's gonna give me the 1 Murloc. It's gonna see, oh, okay, you don't have 3 cards. I'm gonna add a Murloc. It's gonna give me that second Murloc. Oh, you don't have 3 cards. It's gonna give me that third Murloc. And then as soon as I play a Murloc, it's gonna give me another Murloc. It's constantly activating and updating itself on board, which means you're kind of cycling into Murlocs over and over and over again, which, yeah, if you have an empty hand and you have a lot of mana and you play this on board, I think you're just going to be able to summon a bunch of cheap Murlocs alongside it. It's just going to keep generating you stuff. And you're going to end up with a hand that has 3 Murlocs in it for later as well, which sounds kind of crazy. I mean, you know, small empty-ish hands are not the sort of thing we love in Hearthstone these days. Even like aggro decks often have a lot more cards in hand. So I think there's some risk in trying to build and play for a deck that has empty hands and kind of hoping you hit your Howdy Fin. But maybe if you're already playing a bunch of Murlocs anyway, you have a Murloc deck and Murloc synergies, this might feel kind of like a free addition that just, it's a get out of jail free card sometimes, where it's like, okay, I'm down to my last couple cards. The Howdy Fin here, you're gonna bail me out and help me generate a bunch of stuff and make maybe like a last wave or 2 of threats that helps me hopefully get over the hump here and defeat my opponent, which kind of makes this card look insane. It's one of those where it does need a very specific deck and a very specific home, but the power output potential, if we're reading this correctly, or at least how I'm reading it, seems really nuts for this card. So next up, we got the Azurite Chain Gang. This is a 4-mana 2/3 with Taunt and Battlecry and Quick Draw. Summon a copy of this. So obviously harkening back to the Serenite Chain Gang, which was actually a really good card in its era. That era has been a long time ago. I think we're like 6 years off now from the Serenite Chain Gang. But you know, this big body, the big wall of bodies can historically be a useful sort of thing in Hearthstone, particularly with the way this interacts with things like hand buffs. You buff this up a couple times, you summon a copy of it, and you're feeling good about those hand buffs. Now, we have actually seen kind of a better version of a hand buffable version of this in Death Knight, the 4-mana 1/3s. I don't remember their name, but you get 3 of those, so you're kind of tripling any hand buff action. This can triple, much like that card in Death Knight, but notably, it has to be played the turn you draw it for it to triple. You get 3 of these. Which means it's going to be hard to hand buff in those instances, because it's hard to, you know, have enough mana to hand buff it and then play it all in the same turn. 'Cause any previous hand buffs, it won't have been in hand for the quick draw, of course. I'm trying to pull up that card, the Nerubian Swarm Guard here, as you can see. Kind of a similar vibe. Slightly less attack, but much better in a hand buff scenario. So, you know, that's interesting with this card. I actually do think a 4-mana card that summoned 3/2/3 taunts reliably would be playable in modern day standard format. I actually think that's enough bodies and enough of a wall that would feel good. The question is, how often are you actually hitting those 3 bodies when you want? Because it's like, you want to play that on turn 4. That's when it's the most exciting. If you had it earlier in hand, it's only going to be 2, which I don't think holds up to modern day Hearthstone standards. And if you hit it late in the game, you're not as excited about those bodies. You know, on like turn 7 or 8 or something, these kind of things get lost in the shuffle a lot more than they would on turn 4. So I think it's a card that probably requires really specific timing to feel relevant. And then based on its quick draw effect, it doesn't like really specific timing for its most effective state. So I don't know, this feels a little clunky to me because of that. It's actually a pretty notable downside here that a lot of the things we like about this card are baked into the quick draw instead of its base state. And I think that might keep it from getting played too much. So moving on here, we've got the Burrow Buster, a 5-mana 6/4 mech with Rush and Battlecry Excavate a Treasure. Now, if you forgot what Excavate was since our last video, Excavate's going to allow you to grab one of these treasures, and each time you excavate, it's going to go up a tier. So you'll get a random common the first time you excavate. The next time you excavate, you'll get a random rare, and then the next time you excavate, you'll get a random epic. I think it's really curious they gave these the rarities, even though the mana costs do indicate which stage you're on. I think the rarities were there to help you indicate your stage, like, oh, I have a rare, so I'm gonna get an epic, but the costs do that too. So anyway, I don't know, it's so unusual to have gems on uncollectible cards. Regardless, you're gonna get one of these treasures. So, you know, maybe by turn 5 when you play this, you're getting the awesome like 3 cost treasures. Set yourself up for some cool follow-up plays and some big stuff. I mean, listen, the treasures are really good. I think they're all very strong cards, very efficient cards. Some probably going to feel better than other in various game states, which it has me keeping an eye on Excavate for sure. But I don't think decks are going to need to go like 6 cards deep in Excavate in a given game. I mean, you might have to run 6 in your deck for consistency, but you're not going to need to play all the Excavate cards, for instance, in your deck necessarily, because games tend to end before you'd have like multiple cycles, because once you get to the epic cycle of the Excavate, it kicks back to common and you roll back up again. So the point I'm getting at is there's going to be a cutoff in any given deck where you stop needing Excavate cards. Probably you're satisfied with the consistency your Excavate offers, and you don't need to necessarily run stuff like Burrow Buster. This, in other words, might be a little bit expensive. It might come in too late for Excavate cards, when you'd rather just run cheap, flexible ones to make sure you're able to play those treasures more immediately. The more expensive the Excavate gets, it's perhaps harder to kind of follow it up with a treasure right away, or just you're waiting too long to cycle through that Excavate stuff. So the more expensive an Excavate card is, the less hopeful I am for its play rate, basically. I mean, you already saw you know, like 2-mana Excavate neutral that seems like that's so much easier to weave into turns. Now, you know, a 6/4 with Rush for 5 mana definitely doesn't keep up with modern day Hearthstone. The treasure excavation helps, but again, I do feel like this is going to be near the bottom of the list of Excavate. So I don't know how many decks are going to make room for this. There is that mech bonus that's possible. There's always like Rush stuff that's a possible bonus as well. So it has a couple different angles decks could approach it from, but I still have that feeling it's going to fall short compared to its cheaper peers. So next up, we have the Cattle Rustler, and there's something unsettling about a Tauren picking up a regular cow. I don't know what it is. The lineage between these creatures is too similar, and I don't want to have to think about what that means. And I don't know, there's just something about this that's weird. But this is a 5-mana 3/4 Battlecry. Draw a beast. It costs 3 less. So some big mana cheat here, basically making the Cattle Rustler cost effectively kind of like 2-mana 3/4 that draws you a card. The reality is not quite that simple, because this has to wait until turn 5 to be played. And if you're getting a big awesome beast that you're excited about in particular, you want to kind of cheat it out sooner, it gets a little bit harder to do that because you're not going to be playing it in the same turn. For instance, if you had like a Colossal you were looking to cheat into play, having to wait till turn 5 to play the Cattle Rustler means you're not playing that like early Hydralodon like we saw in Hunter so often in the past. You'd be playing the Hydralodon on turn 6, which is still a little early technically, but Not that like game-winning early state we've seen in the past. It does let you do other things alongside it on that turn 6, which is kind of cool. So there's still upside, of course, to these discounts and can play for bigger swings, but it does make the pool of results you're excited about, I think, a lot weaker. And I certainly don't think like drawing a 3-mana beast and playing it immediately alongside the Cattle Rustler feels all that exciting either. It's like, okay, I got a 3/4 and a 3-mana beast. That's not exactly a great turn 5 in Hearthstone. We need to advance gameplay and more rapidly than that can provide. There could be some, sneaky, crazy scenarios where you kind of save these like 0 cost things in hand and do some weird combo or something with a beast that's a combo enabler. You always like to keep that stuff in the back of your mind, but again, that feels like you're cooking a little too crazy for that to be a consistently good thing, and certainly not something we would expect at default for a card like this. So I guess at the end of the day, that 5-mana overhead feels a little high for a card like this, even though you are getting that cost discount. It's kind of coming in too late. It's coming in on the back end, and it feels like you're paying a pretty big upfront cost in tempo sacrifice and upfront cost to get that payoff later, which to me doesn't seem like it's going to be worth it. Flint Firearm is a 3-star card. Azurite Chain Gang is a 2-star card. Bounty Board is a 2-star card. Burrow Buster is a 2-star card. Cattle Rustler is a 2-star card. Howdy Finn is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review of some neutral cards. This is always the case with these neutrals. Not usually the most exciting and most powerful set of stuff. It just rings true that neutral cards often fall short, minus, the 3 or 4 amazing legendaries that define the meta. I don't think Flint's going to live in that space, but a card with more potential certainly than some of the cards in this video, particularly in a Highlander world. I think Flint will make some decks for sure. So curious to hear what you all think about these cards. Leave those thoughts down in the comments below. Stay tuned for more card reviews as we see more new Badlands stuff. Thanks for watching, and until next time, game on.